There's a secret approach that the top 1% of candidates use to land their dream roles in energy, and it's got nothing to do with your grades or how much experience you have. I used it to land my dream energy job straight out of uni while my classmates were still sending applications 6 months later. The difference wasn't my resume, industry connections, or pure luck. It came down to one shift in how I approached every single interview that turned them from one-way interrogations into real conversations. And in this video, I'm going to break down the 4-step intentional interview system I followed so you can walk into any energy interview and own the conversation from the moment you sit down. Most graduates walk into interviews hoping the right questions come up, but they leave the room without having ever mentioned it because no one directly asked. That's not bad luck, that's a preparation problem. So the first step of the intentional interview system is a list of your non-negotiables. A non-negotiable is a core strength or selling point that you need to communicate regardless of what you're asked in the interview. A previous internship, your honours project, a scholarship with a well-known institution. If you leave an interview without landing these, you've left value on the table. But most graduates make a critical mistake when building this list. They rank their experiences by what feels impressive to them, not what actually matters to the people hiring. You can fix this mistake in 2 stages. First, do a full stock take. List every project, every role, every skill, and every commitment without filtering them out. Get it all down on paper. Then reorder it by industry relevance. If you're targeting a role in energy and mining, an honours project analysing oil refinery operations ranks above a future talent scholarship, which ranks above a high school captaincy. Industry relevance wins every time. The interviewer simply doesn't care what you're proud of, they care what solves their problem. For me, my top 5 non-negotiables for interviewing at an electricity network service provider were: number 1, an internship with a local DNSP, being SA Power Networks. Number 2 was an honours project analysing thermal energy storage within the power system. Number 3 was a scholarship with the Australian Power Institute. Number 4 was a conference at the integration of DER, which I attended in Adelaide. And number 5 was a startup venture that I started in my 3rd year of university. Now that you know your list of non-negotiables, you need to be ready to weave these into your answers no matter what question they ask you. And that's where most candidates come completely unprepared. The second step of the intentional interview system is star stories. Most graduates prepare answers, but they rarely prepare stories. And that's a huge mistake because energy interviews rarely ask exactly what you rehearsed. So if you just prepare cookie cutter answers, they won't fit the questions you get asked. You can fix this by using a well-renowned framework called STAR, which stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Result. It's the gold standard for behavioral interview responses because it gives the interviewer concrete evidence of your capabilities, not just your personal claims. Anyone can say they're a good problem solver, but the STAR framework helps you to actually show it. But the real power of STAR isn't just having strong stories prepared, it's being able to reshape the same experience to answer a completely different question, so your non-negotiables come through regardless of what you're asked. Here's how that works in practice. Say you led a team project designing a solar and battery scheme for a holiday park in Jordan. For a question like, tell us about a time you had to lead a team, your response could be, for situation, led a 4-person team designing a solar and battery system for a holiday park in Jordan. For the task, had to coordinate across different engineering disciplines within a tight academic deadline. The specific action, ran weekly check-ins, divided the work by strengths, and kept the group aligned on scope. And then result, delivered a complete system design on time with the project receiving the highest grade in the cohort. Whereas for a question like, tell us about a time you faced a problem you didn't know how to solve, your response could be, for situation, same project, but midway through we realized that the battery sizing assumptions we'd built the whole design around were wrong. For task, as a result, we had to rescope a core component of the design with only 2 weeks left, and therefore the action broke the problem down, consulted our supervisor, and redistributed the task so that we could rebuild that section without derailing the rest of the project. And finally, the result, result, we submitted on time with a stronger design and learned more in those 2 weeks than the rest of the semester combined. You can see how I incorporated the same project into 2 different questions, both of them true, but used it as an example to demonstrate different strengths. So the flexibility that the STAR framework gives is what turns your non-negotiables into weapons, because now you can include them in almost any angle the interviewer throws at you. But knowing how to tell stories is only half the battle you fight in an interview, because even candidates with great STAR stories consistently lose roles at the final stage, and the reason is something that almost no one expects, leading into step number 3 of the intentional interview system being question preparation. In my experience across 10 plus hiring processes, every energy interview follows the same pattern. All of the questions they ask fall into 4 question types that I assemble into what I call the GATE framework. The GATE framework begins with G standing for general, questions like tell me about yourself and why energy. It then rolls into A being action-based questions, questions like describe a time you solved a complex problem, rolling into T standing for technical questions, how would you approach designing a renewable energy system, and rounding it off is E being excellence questions, what's your greatest achievement? That is GATE. So prepare a targeted response for each category and you've covered the vast majority of what any energy interviewer will throw at you. By the way, if you want free access to the 50 most common interview questions energy companies ask, check out the first link in the description where I give them away for free. But just knowing the 4 types exist isn't enough. The difference between a forgettable answer and one that lands comes down to how you construct each response. And most graduates have never seen what a strong energy interview answer actually looks like. So I'm going to show you one for each category, real questions from real interviews I've sat in through my time in energy. So starting off with general, this question came from my interview at Oricon, and the question is, tell us why you're interested in a career in energy. Now, a few things to notice here. The answer doesn't open with passion. It opens with a timeline, primary school, high school, university, 2022, conference. That progression shows the interviewer that your interest doesn't appear overnight. It's built through real experiences over time. Then it names a specific moment, the 2022 electrification conference. Concrete details are always more believable than vague enthusiasm. And it closes on action, not I'm really interested in energy, but every decision since has been about getting closer to this industry. In other words, you're showing why you're interested, not just telling them. That's the difference between a candidate who's keen and a candidate who's serious. General questions like these are actually the easiest to prepare for because you control the whole narrative. But action-based questions are much harder because the interviewer is pushing you into territory you didn't choose yourself. Rolling into action-based, this one came up during my API scholarship interview, and the question is, tell us about a time you didn't know the answer to a problem and how you went about solving it anyway. Notice what this answer is not about. It's not about Excel, the pivot tables are just the context. What the interviewer is actually assessing is what you did the moment you hit an unknown, and the answer here is you didn't flag it as a blocker, you removed it yourself. Proactiveness is the hero of this story. The outcome, leadership funding a fully automated version, does the selling itself. As I mentioned previously, behavioral questions that I call action-based revolve around the STAR framework. And this example here elicits that perfectly with situation, task, action, and result. Now, action-based questions test your past behavior, but technical questions test how you think in real time, under pressure, about something you may have never been asked before. Another question I got in my graduate interview at SA Power Networks was, can you name the stages you need to undergo throughout a specific project? Here's the most important thing to understand about technical questions in energy interviews. The interviewer is rarely looking for the perfect answer. They're watching how you think through a problem when you're not sure. If you hit a stage you're uncertain about, reason through it out loud. For example, at this point, I'd imagine you need to validate X before moving to Y, rather than going silent. Engineering judgment under uncertainty is exactly what energy companies are hiring for. Your decision-making process matters more than technical precision. Show them how you think, not just what you know. And so for the project case in this one, the trap that a lot of grads fall into is getting really deep into technical depth and and almost forgetting what actual question they're being asked. And so I've certainly been fallen victim to that in the past, where you start on a very technical topic, get really far down a rabbit hole, then come back up and forget the actual purpose of the question. And so when we're talking through the one about the project, although you may not specifically be or have experience in project management roles, you've probably spent time in a project team, whether it be at university or as an intern at a company, and can think through the different segmentation of tasks that you actually completed as a part of that project. And so that's generally the approach I've taken to this answer, where everything starts with a business case, because in large companies, you're competing for money. If something doesn't provide value, therefore you don't get that money. So you've got to start with proving why this project actually provides value for the company, and that is the business case. From there, you scope out what you're going to be completing, and from there you go to the actual design, detailed design, delivery and construction. In this case, it could be a software project where it's just delivery, and then everything gets handed over to testing and eventually commissioned. So this is a very project side of a technical question, but invaluable nonetheless. But as I said before, it's more about the process of how you're thinking from the panel rather than the actual correctness of your answer. So far, we've addressed general action-based and technical questions, which are more commonly known. But the final question type is the one most candidates do not expect and therefore completely mishandle. An example of an excellence question that I got in an interview at Oricon is, why should we hire you? Now, every instinct tells you to sell yourself here. List your strengths, name your achievements, make the case. But that's the wrong move, because every other candidate is doing exactly that. So you won't stand out. This answer on screen works because it doesn't sell, it connects. It takes what matters to the candidate, being to solve real problems, and links it directly to what the company is building. The interviewer doesn't feel like they're being pitched, they feel like they've found someone who actually wants to be there. And so what I want to elicit here is effectively linking my personal strengths and interests to the mission of the company. So a lot of the big energy companies are companies that have existed for 10, 20, 30, multiple decades. And so they've got a long-standing mission and history of fulfilling that mission, but they've also got 30 to 40 years of planned future vision for the company. And the best way to sell yourself is not to sell yourself on your accolades, but focus on how your strengths and interests align with the company. Again, linking back to how you answer general questions to therefore project that into excellence. And so taking your strengths and interests and formulating in a way that aligns with their mission leaves a really sweet taste in their mouth, because this is commonly the last question that you get answered in an interview. So you now have the GATE framework and the answers, but there's one final step that almost all graduates skip entirely, and it's the reason even well-prepared candidates freeze when it matters most. The final step of the intentional interview system is the preparation strategy. You wouldn't walk into an engineering exam without studying, yet most graduates walk into interviews having done nothing more than read through their notes the night before, and then they go blank the moment the pressure hits. Deliberate practice is a non-negotiable, and it starts with this. Start by simulating an interview by recording yourself. Set up your phone, deliver your answer to each GATE question type, and watch it back. You'll immediately notice things you can't feel in real time: filler words, pacing, where your energy drops, moments where your answer loses direction. Repeat this process until your key stories come out naturally without sounding rehearsed. While the recording method builds self-awareness, there's one thing it can't replicate: the fear that comes from having another person in the room. So to simulate this, I recommend doing a live mock interview. Find someone you trust, give them your resume, and ask them to interview you properly. Eye contact, real questions, push back on your answers. Do this a handful of times and the actual interview will feel familiar rather than foreign. The nerves don't disappear, but they stop sabotaging you. The more uncomfortable the practice session, the calmer you'll be when it counts. And it's probably important to recognize that the nerves won't disappear, but they stop sabotaging you as much. The more uncomfortable the practice session, the calmer you'll be when it counts. You now understand the 4-step intentional interview system, the exact system I used to win my graduate role at SA Power Networks. But if you're serious about landing one, the final step of your preparation is having the right practice questions to work from. I give those away for free inside my free school community, link is in the top of the description.